Welcome back to the third chapter of The Parenting Connection. I'm Pam.
And I'm Jim. And today we're going to talk about child development. But let's do a little review of the first two chapters. In chapter 1, we talked a lot about similarities and differences among parents, among kids. And one of the things we talked about were meal times. And we talked about how everyone is the same and that they have to eat, and yet meal times tend to be different for everybody. And we really explored that through different personal stories. And another big thing we talked about were temperaments. And we said the temperaments are like personalities. And, you know, everyone has a bit of a different personality, a bit of a different temperament, but we talked about 4 main temperaments. And we explored that a little bit, and we said that when you understand something about that, it can help you to understand yourself a little better, understand your child a little better, basically any relationship in your life.
And why maybe your children are different from each other and why they respond to you differently.
That's right, that's right. And the 4 that we laid out were, and they have strange names, phlegmatic, sanguine, choleric, and melancholic.
Right.
And we said that the phlegmatic and the melancholic, they tend to be a little more shy.
More introverted.
More introverted, right? And the sanguine and the choleric, they tend to be more outgoing, more extroverted.
Right.
Have a lot of energy. And those are just some basic differences with them.
Yeah.
So we looked at all kinds of similarities and differences. In chapter 2, we looked at different parenting styles to begin with. And we said, again, there are like 4 main types of parenting styles. We have the dictator, who really has a lot of rules and is very rigid. We talked about a doormat parent, who is kind of the opposite. Instead of being in charge like the dictator, they are sort of a little bit more shy in a way, and the child takes charge.
They tend to not want to be the bad guy, and so they always give in, and then the child starts to feel like there's no adult there to really protect them.
Yeah, the child steps up. There's also the abandoning parenting style, and that's where the parent tends to withdraw. And there's lots of reasons why that could be. And in many ways, that's the most difficult parenting style for kids to deal with and grow up in.
Because they're left on their own to survive, and they don't have the support or the tools they need really to be safe.
That's right. And then the last one we talked about was the connected parent. And they're the ones who really, they have that connection, they have that relationship, and they try to nurture that and you know, make that stronger. And that's the one that in many ways is the best. And that's what we're all shooting for the most we can.
Because we know that children grow and their brains thrive through relationship. And all of us require relationship to be able to function at our highest levels.
That's right. You know, after the parenting styles, we talked about something kind of similar, but it kind of builds on this idea of styles. We talked about climates in the home. And this is sort of the overall mood, feeling, or atmosphere in the house. And we said it's a little bit like the weather. You know, it can change. Sometimes, you know, if one of the parents is in a good mood, hey, it's like a sunny day in there. But if they're not, if they're upset and angry, then it can be very stormy and dramatic. And, you know, kids have to learn how to sort of deal with that. You know, because it really is the parents who set that mood.
They have a lot more power. They're much bigger and they have more control over resources, and they're just more able to define things.
That's right. That's right. So these climates are similar to the parenting styles. You know, we have the rigid climate where the parent is very inflexible, lots of rules, kind of like a dictator in many ways. We have the criticism, the critical atmosphere where, you know, the parent is always finding what's wrong with the child. So there's constant criticisms, probably name calling, And that can be just as difficult for the child to deal with. Sometimes they fight against those criticisms, or sometimes they take it to heart and it hurts them a lot. And they may carry those labels with them, for a long time.
It might make it tough for them to do well in school, or to take risks, or to really explore their own gifts.
That's right. The marshmallow climate is a lot like the doormat parenting style. That's where the child is sort of in charge, and they have too much freedom. It's not really a good thing, even though sometimes the child might like that. They might like to go to bed when they want and have as many cookies as they want, but they're going to take it too far.
They have too much power without enough understanding. They don't understand that it's important to be well rested for the next day. I had a parent one time who said that her child put himself to bed wherever he dropped by 2 a.m. And when I asked her how old the child was, she said 1. And I said, well, you have to put them to bed. And so creating routines and creating structure for children is just as important as creating nurture and experience.
Yeah, because kids don't have good judgment. They can't think about cause and effect very well, and they have poor impulse control.
Right.
So again, there's lots of reasons why it makes it hard for them to raise themselves. That's why they need parents.
Right.
Again, we have the abandonment climate, very similar, and that's where the parent might be there at times physically, and they might be very angry, or they might be asleep, or
depressed, or they could be addicted to drugs, passed out, or they just might not even be home because, maybe they are at their boyfriend's house or something, and they leave the children home alone, or for whatever reason, maybe they work many jobs just to keep the family afloat.
That's right. And all these climates we're talking about, we don't mean to criticize anyone. Everyone is dealing with lots of different factors that sort of make them who they are and influence things. So we realize many times people are doing their best.
Right.
The last two climates are more positive. They're more like the connected parent. So in some homes, there are non-negotiable rules. So the child knows that there are rules they have to follow, like maybe there's a curfew, or there's rules about doing their homework, or visiting with friends. And the child knows they have to follow these rules. They're not really open to debate, but the child feels like, well, I know that I have to follow these rules, but at least I know what they are, and they seem pretty fair, so I can deal with it.
Right, these are reasonable rules that kids can understand.
They don't always like it, but kids, they're never going to like everything anyway.
Right.
So it's a good, positive way to grow up. And the last kind of climate is more negotiable rules. So this is a similar climate, except in this household, the child has a little bit more leeway to sort of talk about things, and probably especially as they get older, to have a few more freedoms and talk about things.
They're able to negotiate, and the parent is willing to share their power with the child, so that the child starts to be able to make their own decisions and learn from their own mistakes sometimes, and the parent's there to support and to sort of be the overseer, but the child still has a little bit more feeling of independence.
Yeah, and that's important as the child gets older, because they can think more. They'll have more ideas of their own, and if they don't have a little more say in their own life, they're not going to develop that feeling of independence, which is really important to them.
Exactly, for their functioning as an adult.
Yeah, for their feelings, and also so that they can see themselves doing things in the world, that they can take care of themselves. Yeah, so those are the climates. And that was chapter 2. And now in chapter 3, we're going to talk about child development. But at the end of chapter 2, we also talked about how when you love something, you want to know more about it. And, your kids are like that too, right? So the more interest you take in your kids, the more you love them, the more you want to know about them, the more time you want to spend with them. And if you think about some of the things that you like let's say you're a woman and you like cars, right? That's a possible thing. And so you want to know about different kinds of cars and what countries they come from and engines and things like that. Or let's say that you're a guy and you want to know more about, fashion. So you probably know who designers are, and you may think about what colors you look good in. And so that becomes a whole world, that you start to look into and find out more about. And, again, your kids are the same way. The more interest we take in them, the more we'll get to know them, and the more we'll begin to love and appreciate who they are.
For most parents, children are the most important aspect of their lives. And we're programmed as human beings for our children to survive and thrive. The study of child development helps us to help our children to become their best selves. And so today I'm going to talk to you about some different aspects of child development. First of all, there is physical development. And physical development is the easiest part of development for parents to observe. They see their children growing. They see them being able to do new things. Anything from a baby lifting its head to learning eventually to move around and pick up small things with their fingers and their thumbs, and eventually to be able to run, ride a bike, drive a car. So all of these types of physical abilities are really highly valued in our society, and we're pretty tuned into children's physical development. The second type of aspect of development that I want to mention is our cognitive or our intellectual development. That's your ability to think and to learn. And so it's a really important aspect of development. It's where kids learn language, they learn how to solve problems, they learn how to think clearly. This is a very gradual process, and we know that the brain grows up until the age of between 26 and 30 years of age. So it's not reasonable to think that a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, or even a 10-year-old is capable of doing the type of mature thinking that an adult is. And so there's things that we can do to help enhance kids' growth. One is to expose them to language, and that means reading them stories, telling them stories, talking with them, exposing them to the types of education, maybe like Sesame Street or television or games that help develop those sort of intellectual problem solving and language skills. And of course, things like numbers, counting games, singing, rhymes, all those types of play help kids to have a much bigger understanding of the world, and they can use that in their imaginations. And we're going to talk later about play, but the fact is that children process new information and their environment through play, and that's how they gain mastery over it. So one of the most important things to remember here is that children are not adults, and that there's a lot to learn about each age of development. The third type of development is a little bit trickier. It's emotional development. In our culture, we tend to value physical and intellectual development much more than we attend to our emotional development. But the fact is that emotional development is responsible for empathy, the ability to see things from another person's point of view. That doesn't happen immediately. Little babies are wired to survive, and so they depend on their caregivers to comfort them and to help them to be calm and regulate themselves. And how do they do that? They sing to them, they rock them, they feed them, they change their diaper, keep them comfortable, and that creates a sense of regulation, and eventually those children learn how to find ways to regulate their own selves. And then the other aspect, I guess, that I want to talk about with emotional development is the ability to learn to use language to try to help express ourselves. Because there's something about telling someone about how angry I feel, or how disappointed I am, or how excited I am, that makes me somehow, that the expression of that makes me feel better. And emotions are like weather, they come and go, but they're sort of meant to be shared with another human being. And so that's the way that we learn how to sort of regulate our emotions. Now I want to talk a little bit about social development. And social development is related to emotional development, because if you're unable to regulate your emotions, you're going to have a harder time connecting with other people. And so Relationships are one of the most important aspects of being a human being. We have been designed to be in relationship with others. And so the way that we have learned to trust or to feel safe around other people is going to impact greatly the way that we're able to relate to people. So social development, again, starts very early. The first template, it was with the mother and the child, where the mother looks at the baby. It's called attending, paying attention to the baby, trying to read the baby and learn what the baby needs. That's the very beginning of social development. When a child gets to be about age 3, they're able to play around other children. They can do what's called parallel play, but they don't really understand yet that the differences or the complexities of being able to interact in a cooperative way with another human being. So as we develop socially, our behaviors change. When kids get to adolescence, their social development becomes much more oriented toward their friends and their peers. That's because they're getting ready to launch. Otherwise, they would never leave the home, and the parents would remain dependent on the parents. So it's really important for kids to, and for parents to recognize that these differences are normal and necessary parts of children's growth. The last part of development that I want to talk about briefly is spiritual development. Spiritual development means the ability to make meaning of the world outside of yourself and your family. The world is filled with danger, difficulties, and injustices, but it's also filled with beauty and fun and humor and lots of really amazing experiences. And so humans have found different rituals, traditions, festivals, some people to celebrate and to sort of make meaning. Sometimes it's through religion, sometimes it's through a family culture or tradition, through meals, and these become really rich and varied in different communities and within different families. It's a whole nother aspect that children learn to develop their own unique sense of making meaning from the world as they get older. There's a lot to learn about child development, and it's impossible for us to cover that in a short, small session. But I can tell you that there's many interesting books to read on this topic. So the first one I want to point you to is from the Gesell Institute of Child Development. And there's an author, Louise Bates Ames, who has a whole series of books. This one is your 1-year-old. The one we have over here is your 3-year-old. It goes all the way up through 12. There's also the book, for example, What to Expect the First Year. There's a book here called On the Threshold of Adolescence, The Struggle for Independence in the 12th Year. So I encourage you to go to your local library or to your bookstore or to go online and look for some books that might apply to the children that you're currently raising, and see if there's some interesting, helpful hints in there that might help you grow in your understanding of your child. Today, we sort of opened up a whole new world of child development. And while people have spent years in the study of this topic, we understand that we're not going to be able to spend that much time. However, this is just to show you that there's a lot to be learned, and there's a lot that you can learn on your own. So I think it's just going to be important for you to take the opportunities that come your way and to try to find out more about your kids. Why are they behaving the way they do? What would be a typical behavior for a child of this age? And I think it's going to make your family life interesting and also more enjoyable.
So do you mind if we write questions into you once in a while?
That'd be fine. At the end of the tape, there'll be a website, the Pam and Jim Show, where you can send questions to us and we can answer them in future episodes. And there are times as we're covering other materials that we'll be talking about different ages of kids. When we get to talking about communication, discipline, and how to handle various problems that happen at different ages.
All right, so next we're going to do a little painting. And painting is a way of playing. And in the next chapter, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of play. And one of the ideas we want to get across is that play is not just for kids, it's really for adults too. We all need ways to unwind, to enjoy ourselves, to use our imaginations, and, painting could be one great way to do that. So in your care package, we sent you some watercolor paints, some paper, and then all you need is a little cup of water. Okay? So, I'm going to wet my brush and just start making my paper wet. You don't have to start this way, but sometimes I like to start this way. And what this will do is, when I finally put paint on paper, the paint will kind of flow around. It's hard to get the paper really wet with a little tiny brush. If you have a paintbrush at home of the kind you use to paint your walls, that'll be better at putting a lot of water on paper. This is also good for, just putting color on here, or what we call abstract painting. That's where it doesn't really look like anything, and that's what I'm going to do here today. Although if you want to paint your name or a picture, then you might not want to do this because that'll make the paint hard to control. You'll see what I mean here in a moment. Okay, this is not perfect, but I'm going to go ahead now and get some paint. And really, I'm not trying to paint anything in particular. I'm just going to have some fun here with color. So I'll take a little green and just put it down, and let's see what happens. Okay, that's great. Get a little more. Watercolor paint is such an experiment. It's hard to know what's going to happen. So you really just have to play around with it. It's not like drawing. Drawing is easier to control, and you can control where the line goes. Watercolor paint tends to do whatever it wants. So in that way it's exciting, but it's hard to control too. It's fun to play around with though. So I've got a little green, and if I just take water, I can pull the paint in different directions. I can water it down. And okay, let me get another color here. Let me get some red. Let's start to put that down. Red, it's interesting to see what happens when you mix colors. So red and green are, in a way, they're opposite colors. I know they're Christmas colors, but they're also opposite colors. And when you mix them, let's see what happens here. Well, they're not mixing very well. You tend to get a brown or a dark green or something, or black or something like that. But when you put two opposite colors beside each other, like red and green, they both start to look brighter. It's just something about those colors and how they act. Okay, green, red. All right, let's keep going here. I'm going to add, I want a little bit of orange. I'm going to start mixing that in. Let's see if I can mix it with the red and make sort of a reddish orange. Try that. You see here, I'm not trying to paint a car, although that's cool. I love cars and things like that, but I'm just having fun just using color. It doesn't have to really look like anything if you don't want. Oh wow, okay, I kind of like that orange there. Now I'm going to go for a little yellow and see what happens. Start to mix that in. Starting to take on a rainbow effect because I'm using all these colors. One interesting thing about watercolor paints is they tend to be light in color, and they don't, it's not like when you paint a wall. You know, wall paint tends to cover the wall, and so the light doesn't really shine through. But with watercolors, the white of the paper still wants to show through. And so whatever parts you leave white are going to be the brightest parts in the whole painting. But that's one of the neat things about watercolors is that you can kind of see the whiteness of the paper kind of comes through the paint. It makes it very bright. Unless you put it on so thick that you're trying to put layer after layer on, and then it will tend to cover the paper. Then it's more like poster paint. It all depends what effect you are into. All right, yellow. Oh, let's see. Maybe if I mix a little blue in here, let's see what happens. Mix that with my yellow. Let's see. And this is where it is fun to experiment. Mixing colors, like, let's see what happens. I know that if I mix yellow and blue, I should get green. Whether that happens or not, that's another question. I can see it happening a little bit, a little green. I don't know if it looks like that green, but it's happening. It's happening. Let's see how dark we can get this. It's really got a lot of paint. You'll notice too when we paint, sometimes it's kind of spotty, like you see a little white, I don't know what to call them, little dots coming through. That's because the paper, when you look, it actually is not perfectly smooth. It has a bit of a texture. They call that the tooth. That's the tooth of the paper coming through. And it helps to sort of grab the paint and catch it. And if you put a lot of water on the paper, you can get around that, but sometimes that texture is kind of nice. Sometimes you want a little bit of that. Okay, let's see, what didn't I use yet? Oh, let's try a little purple. It's hard to tell the purple from the black, but there is a difference here. So again, I'm just experimenting with color and seeing what happens. And color is a really neat thing, and maybe you appreciate color. Maybe, you know, there's colors you like to be around, like in your house, or colors you like to wear. Some people have favorite colors. Some people maybe don't think a lot about color. It's kind of a personal thing. Maybe you like bright colors. Maybe that's your thing. Or maybe you like really quiet colors. Either way, it's fun to think about that and to experiment. Now I'm mixing it with the blue, seeing how that goes. Okay, yeah. I mean, I also have brown and black here, and I could bring them in if I wanted to, but I kind of like how bright this is. So I think I'll leave them out of this. And of course, as this dries, it will change. So that's another sort of unpredictable element about painting this way. But, hey, if you look at it like it's all a big experiment, then, you know, everything can be interesting. So we hope we've encouraged you to do a little bit of play yourself. Try some painting. Just have fun with it. You don't have to consider yourself a great artist. Just like when you're in the shower, you know, you can try singing, and hey, if no one hears you, great. You can just have fun, be as loud as you want. But the idea is to let yourself play. So we hope you enjoyed a little painting. Just have fun with it again. And painting, again, and play is a really important thing for adults as well as children. And next time we'll talk about the importance of play, some of the things that are getting in the way of children playing nowadays, and why that could be problematic, but also why that play is so important for their healthy development, especially what we call free play. It's something as old as pretty much as children are, and it's something we can't afford to lose. And we're going to talk more about that next time.